deep concern over the future. Now, I strongly agree with those voices who advocate for a heightened embrace of like-minded Israelis rather than distancing ourselves from Israel. What's happening in Israel is not an isolated occurrence. Indeed, we've seen growth of corruption and populism and authoritarianism in many lands, including ours. Now, to help make sense of what some in Israel are experiencing and to consider our reactions and next steps, we have with us Dr. Hadar Lubin, chair of our congregation's Israel Advocacy Committee, and her husband, Dr. David Johnson, whom have just returned from Israel, where they have been visiting family. And we're going to ask Hadar and David to give us a review of some of what they have seen. And so for those of us in the social hall, you guys are up on the big screen. We see you very, very clearly. And please.
Okay, yeah. First of all, Shabbat Shalom. So good to be with all of you. And thank you, Rabbi, for giving us the task to make sense of what's happening in Israel and to understand the nuances about the Israeli government. So I can say that we're not going to do that because it's, of course, highly complicated. But I do want to share with you a little bit of our impression in our recent visit. First of all, we arrived on the day of one of the largest protests in Habima. Arrived from the airport to our apartment where we stay, which is literally a minute and a half from Habima. So we kind of immediately got immersed in the pulse of what's happening among Israelis in relationship to what's happening. I would like to say that my experience of seeing, and David and I went out and seen a lot of the protesters, there was really not a sense of rioting or of real anger, but a concern and a sense of urgency to really stand up to what many Israelis feel. And primarily were people holding Israeli flags, which was rather interesting. And there was a really sense of vitality to the protesters and a sense of a communal experience. There was no sense of any impending chaos or violence or rioting. So that was of interest. Every place we went, everybody is talking about it. But in the same time, in the streets of Tel Aviv, where I spend most of the time, there was a sense of normalcy and people are involved in what's happening in their life. But what I would like to bring, what I've found myself thinking about is that as Israel nearing its 75th birthday, the majority of the years, we really focused on our sense of nationhood, the nation of the Jews, the state, our statehood. And that was because a lot of the time we were often threatened by our neighbors and even beyond our neighbors. So there was a real sense of unity about the importance of really protecting our sovereignty, our ability to defend ourselves, and to, of course, keep the citizens of Israel free and safe. So the sense of nation and statehood was in the forefront of what defined the land of Israel. I would say that since the uprising of this particular government and what led to it, I think put forth the really question of what it is to be a Jewish state. not so much about democracy per se, but really what defined to be a Jew. Is it Jewish enough to be a secular Jew, like say myself, Sabra, fourth generation Israeli? Or do you need, in order to be a Jew, you need to be ultra-Orthodox and just obey the Torah laws? And this question is coming to the fore in this particular debate around the government and how, in all the suggestions that are coming, which are alarming, but it actually raises a very fundamental question, is what is the Jewish state and what it is to be a Jew in the Jewish state. And I think that this is a deeper question to grapple with, and I'm not quite clear as to if there is a way to bridge it, but I do know that it is an important question to really raise. So I just wanted to bring that point. David.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a very interesting state of affairs now, and our friends. We had dinner with many of our friends and family, and many of whom were actually in the protests. It's really interesting because, as Hadar said, usually Israeli politics is about the deep unity among everyone in the country about safety and security. And the focus has always been on whether we should be soft or hard with our neighbors. So if you think about Shimon Peres versus the Likud, or whatever, it was always an issue of, are we trying to reach out to try to collaborate and develop relations with our neighbors for peace, or are we going to be hard in protecting Israel, even though underneath it, everyone's not going to allow any kind of true attack on Israel. Whereas now, that's not what's going to be, that's not the issue. It's completely internal to Israel, about almost like in the United States, the culture wars that we're dealing with very much are involved in the current debate about the Supreme Court and about LGBTQ rights and about the role of the ultra-Orthodox and their status and religious law, the right of return being re-examined. And it's really interesting because on the one hand, the kind of modernization and the globalization of Israel, where, many, many people in Tel Aviv and throughout the country are going back and forth to Europe and the US, and it just feels like an extension of kind of Western civilization and the startup companies and Microsoft and everything like that. And to the extent that continues, it dissipates the identity of the Jewish state, because we're just like everybody else. And part of what's happening, I think, is that the right is saying, wait a minute, we can't just let all of us become secular, and in which case the identity of the Jewish state dissipates, because in order to be a Jewish state, you have to have a relationship to Judaism and the religion. And then on the other hand, it's all the secular Jews who are in the army defending the country, and the Orthodox are not. And they're not participating in the army. The ultra-Orthodox are not participating in the defense of the country, because technically they don't recognize the state of Israel. So there's this, I would say, a certain amount of kind of confusion, or almost it's an odd state that's going on now, I think, among the people that we talk to who are out there protesting around the Supreme Court, and at the same time kind of confused about what's going on, with Netanyahu being this kind of transitional figure of this, the chameleon who is like right at the edge of all of these issues and continues to shift one way or the other in kind of a Putin-esque way, which is really odd for Israelis. So I think it's an interesting, people noted that, the UK has not had until recently a Supreme Court, and their House of Lords was really serving as a Supreme Court, and they're certainly a democracy. And so, is this really an attack on democracy if the Knesset takes precedence over the Supreme Court because they don't have a constitution? And there are all these like nuances going on. So I would say it's a time of some soul searching, and I agree completely with what Hadar said. Is like going forward in a world, a globalized world, where Israel is more and more integrated into the larger system. How do you preserve its identity as a Jewish state? And what is that based on? And if it's not the Jewish religion, and yet the majority of people in Israel have a very loose attachment to the actual religion and feel constrained by it. And a number of people still have to fly to Cyprus to get married. And I mean, it's this whole thing happening. And the only thought I would like to add is, I think it's relevant to us here in the United States, because we as American Jews are kind of in a similar status, which is, what does it mean to be an American Jew? And what kind of a relationship do you have to the religion in order to identify as Jewish? And that's a wide range of answers to that question, which I think have been relevant to B'nai Israel for a long time, in terms of what is the role of the actual practice of the Jewish religion in our identity as American Jews, and our loyalty and concern about the state of Israel. So, yeah, and as typical with anything Jewish and anything Israeli, there's a million different opinions and ideas about it. But I think it really feels different. The politics felt different in that it has turned into this more internal focus around, this is the debate now. It's all about internal politics rather than the relationship to Jordan and Egypt and Saudi Arabia, or Lebanon or Syria. Oddly enough, even though all of those issues are still quite relevant and everything happening there is quite unstable. So, yeah, I think it's a very interesting time.
So thank you so much for that piece of the update. If at all possible, if we can bring just up on our screen to bring it up on such a way so that I guess if we could go to gallery, so that if there are others who are going to wish to ask questions, tonight is a conversation to share some thoughts. I would add two things. So I guess part of what we're experiencing is that there's a time of relative peace. Obviously there's great threats from Iran right now, but there's such an opportunity of relative peace that we can start to have some of the inter-Jewish conversations, which are not always pretty and can likewise also be very troubling and dangerous. We live at a time actually where in Israel, The reform movement and the conservative movement are growing, and we've been waiting for them to grow. I can tell you, I've been tracking this for 30 plus years. What's happening now? Why is that happening now? It's happening now in part because of a looking for some sort of spiritual dimension, which is not ultra-Orthodox and which is not ultra-nationalistic in such a way. I think that Hadar and David, you're also right on target in that historically within Zionism, this has always been a question of what would be the character of Zionism,
Right.
and what would be the vision. And is the vision something about being part of the Socialist Internationale and going to Paris? Or is it something different? And so these conversations are taking a new dimension now. But of course, as you've indicated, and certainly as we're seeing with this government, which is some of its members are very extreme and have positions of authority. There's real concern over where things are. With that, generally we are not a shy group. Would anybody like to make a comment or ask a question? Rabbi Silver? Rabbi Silver, kindly unmute.
I am unmuted, and I'd like to piggyback on what you just said about the growth of the reform and conservative movements in Israel in an attempt to develop a non-Orthodox approach to spirituality. And by the way, I would say that it is a misnomer to refer to the ultra-Orthodox as being spiritually oriented. They are rules oriented.
Right.
Now, it needs to be kept in mind that the ultra-Orthodox, whenever they mention the name of the state of Israel, they always say Yimach Shemam, the equivalent of damn them to hell. And yet these are the people who want to control so much of religious life in Israel, a country that they damn with every time they mention it. They are not loyal to the state. They don't serve in the military. They don't participate in the daily life of Israel. And yet they want this inordinate measure of control over what goes on. The second thing I want to mention has to do with the character of a mass grouping in Israel, or what Westerners, newspapers will say a riot. My son was in Tel Aviv. There were 250,000 people there engaged in a riot, quote, unquote, and there was not one single act of violence. He had the opportunity of going to different minyanim for prayer and study, and that's what you call a riot in Israel. It is not like what we do here in America or what happens elsewhere in the world. Thank you, Rabbi. I will turn my mic off.
And we invite others who wish to make thoughts or comments. Herb Garber.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you. Thank you. Yes.
Oh yeah. I was pressing the wrong bar. I'm on the wrong machine. Every time the question comes up about who is a Jew, and then one needs to ask, and we get a variety of answers and much conflict. But it seems to me that outsiders have no difficulty in identifying Jews. And I'm reminded of Adolf Hitler and his cohorts, and they knew how to define a Jew. And in fact, they were able to find all 6 million and slaughter them. So maybe we should turn to Hitler's definition of a Jew, which means that one of your grandparents, at least, was Jewish, and leave it at that. And then never mind all of these other conniptions about what is a Jew. If you come from Jews, you're a Jew. How about that?
Well, Herb, you raise another important point, and one of the questions, the new government, and because it's so extreme, and it's very, very young. It's just come in, but what it's been saying it wants to do is make very dramatic changes in many different areas, including who is a Jew, and including who can emigrate to Israel. And the definitions that Israel has had for generations, which is if you have some Jewish lineage, you can come, because if Hitler was going to target you, Israel should save you. The Orthodox want to rewrite those rules, and they want to pass changes in the judiciary so that one majority vote in the Knesset would rewrite those rules. And so some of the stakes which will be coming are really great, which is why, again, for my money, I think it's so important that if we engage with like-minded and support like-minded Israelis, they're going to need all the help they can get in fighting for themselves, but also in fighting for us. Joel?
Do you think that existential threats to Israel from various fronts that we all know about, for example, Iran, surely, and threats from the Palestinians in Israel that are very dangerous, and threats in America from progressives who, in my view, mistakenly are not supporting Israel. Do you think that these threats will help bring Israelis together?
Joel, I personally think that when Israel will experience a true, either immediate threat, either from our neighbors or some other form of threats, it will, no question, will help unify Israelis around their sense of this is our nation, this is our place to defend. I think that we, for the first time, and David mentioned that there is a sense of comfort and peace in Israel. There is no a true existential threat that really brought out more internal conflicts. And it is a sad answer in my mind. I personally think that it's exactly what will happen, that when we will have any kind of threat from Iran vis-a-vis Syria, whatever, or the United Nations, anything that will be truly somewhat threatening to Israel, it will unify Israel. But it will be great if we can also find a way internally to coexist in a way that will not impose something on the society that it by itself will become existentially threatening, like not allowing Jews to come because the definition is too narrow, or to reject people because of their sexual orientation or identity. This is not going to be, that is not going to allow Israel to exist. because Israel is very pluralistic society and they will reject it from within. So I think that maybe it's a growing pain in Israel where it will be for the first time a true dialogue through very threatening ideas, like what those ideas in our new government, to organize people to have a better dialogue and to compartmentalize the ultra extremes, and Neturei Karta, all of those extremes that never had a place in the marketplace, in the global place in Israel. So I'm hoping that that will be the way to unify Israel, rather than what I absolutely expect, that when there will be a threat, Israel will unify, and the government will try to defend Israel.
Hang on, Sandy, right before, but Joel, great question. One of the things, and it's very sobering tonight, because today in Israel, at least 7 lives lost, one of the largest terror attacks which we've had in recent years. And when the extremist minister went to the site of the attack, people were shouting at him, now it's up to you what's going to happen. This is happening on your watch. And so how will extremist ministers and how will the government respond, and how amidst this is another, I think, challenge and question which we have right now. Sandy.
I'm not going to go over the political piece. I just want to say, for those of you who know, my brother is Orthodox. He made Aliyah over 40 years ago. He's had 5 children, 2 young men and 3 women. My brother has always lived on the West Bank. He and his wife, and he's not ultra Orthodox, and he's not secular. In this country, he was an Orthodox Jew. He served in the army. He absolutely believes in serving in the army. He served in the reserves every year, left his business so that he could serve in the reserves every year. His sons served in the army. His 3 daughters did alternate service. There are many Jews like him that are not part of the ultra-Orthodox, the black hats, who do not believe in the state of Israel as you described. There are many Orthodox who do believe in the state of Israel and who defend it. It's been many years since my brother and I have talked politics. But I did want to say that there, even among Israeli Jews, there are multiple levels of how they view the state of Israel, how they view its defense, how they view its politics. Just wanted to throw that out.
Great.
Thank you.
And yes, it's as always happens whenever you're talking about Israel, or for that matter, whenever you're talking about Jewry, what always happens is we always should preface things by saying it's complicated, and indeed it's complicated. And yes, the modern Orthodox in Israel are very different than some of the folks within the community who heretofore discussed. Other folks wishing to share a thought or ask a question? Dan. And then I believe Judy after Dan. Dan? Dan, if you could unmute. Uh, Dan,
How about now? Can you hear me now?
now we can hear you. Hope you're feeling okay.
I'm fine. I'm fine. So there's one aspect that hasn't come up, and I like to think of Judaism as a complicated definition, or the Jew, a complicated definition. If you go to an Italian restaurant here in Southbury, and the owner has been here 4 generations, you still call him Italian. If you go to Italy and somebody has moved there recently, he's part of the Italian nation. And the third aspect is strong, using Italy as an example, strong influence of the church. You still have to get married and divorced, regardless of your beliefs in Italy. So for Israel, we talk about nationhood. It's a new concept, 75 years old. Prior to that, 2,000 years ago. We talk about religion. That's very clear what you do, even though there's a tremendous variety of what observances. But we don't talk about Jewish people very much. And I like to think of Jews as a people. We say Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people lives, not Dat Yisrael Chai, the religion of Jews, or the Jewish religion lives. So I think it's important to say that we can separate out factors that define Jews as religion, factors that define Jews as a nation, meaning where they happen to live now in a national entity, and Jews as people. When the Zionist Congress was called, there was no nation. There was no consensus about the role of religion, but there was clearly an effort to unite the Jewish people around a new concept.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, but I think that's being tested more now. I mean, I think within Israel, there's not that kind of underlying sense of affiliation is being tested now, both politically and also religiously, more than ever. As the country, I mean, when it was formed, Israel was so isolated and trying to just crawl out of, into existence. But now it's so connected to the world. And the young people in Israel was buzzing around on their little scooters and everything like that, with colored hair, tattoos, piercings, all on their iPhones and startup companies and whatever. It's a different place. And I think that has really, like in the United States, disrupted more conservative elements within the country that feels that the country is just, and the people are just rushing into this modernistic, progressive world where people are trans and lesbians and all sorts of things they know nothing about and that are kind of not defined within the religious traditions. So there's kind of this backlash of trying to hold on to some older version of identity when the country is catapulting in a way that is disorienting for so many people. And I think that's happening here in the States as well, around the world, where literally the change in social media, the way that people are working, everything is just changing so much. So people are trying to grab onto what they can grab onto. I would expect personally this kind of conflict to only increase over the next several years, because I don't see any change in these tensions. I would think it's going to get more intense, would be my guess.
David, thank you. Dan, thank you. I think a very important point about the significance in the vision, ultimately, of Judaism itself, of peoplehood, and how what's happening is a danger to that. Judy, I saw your hand earlier. If you could come off mute first. Judy, you're on mute. Oh, still on mute.
Unmute.
There you go.
Say, no, I think both of you are very good to share this much with us who are sitting here in Southbury, but very, very attentive to what is going on with the young people today. And it's frightening to think what they're in store for. So Israel, watching Netanyahu and his new committees, they don't know what they're doing very well, and it's somewhat of a frightening atmosphere.
Yeah.
It's nice of you to share with us so much so that we know even better how bad it is.
It is
Well,
bad.
let me take the optimistic view, Judy, and say also so that we can help work to steer the ship back onto a better course, because we need to know where things are up against, and clearly there are issues in our society, there are issues amongst our Israeli brothers, sisters, cousins, as well in their society, which require some sort of redress. And again, this is the time when the need for inclusive, respectful, inclusivistic perspective, it's only heightened now. It hasn't diminished, but thank you for that. Last thoughts, anybody else on our Zoom who hasn't had an opportunity to share and would like to?
Yeah, one
Or one more,
more.
Joel, please.
I want to thank David and Hadar with all my heart. This is wonderful. Really appreciate it. You guys are great.
Yep. True.
Thank you, Joe. You are too.
Well, I'm going to echo all three of you, and I'm also going to thank our very elite crew here in the social hall, and folks who are joining us online this evening. I think we have had a very thoughtful conversation, and as we go forward, we want to continue to have ongoing conversation. And so thank you so much for being, David and Hadar, for leading and guiding the conversation this evening. We will pick up again. In the interim, let me wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. And again, the commercial, next week, it's Linda and her crew, and it is Mi Chamocha night. So it's really going to be a really special evening here as well. So again, Toda Rabbah and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.